I would submit for your consideration that every positive lesson one could ever need to learn about the human character is contained within the story of the Tom Luang cave rescue in northern Thailand in 2018, in which 12 youth soccer players and their assistant coach were famously trapped in a recreational cave system 6.2 miles from the entrance when the monsoon arrived unseasonably early and flooded them all in, where they ultimately remained for nearly 3 weeks, until all were safely egressed over the course of the 17th and 18th days by a couple of British weekend warriors, as well as an Australian bloke who had the misfortune of being the world's only cave diving anesthesiologist. I'm reminded of the line from the Liam Neeson movie. What I do have is a very specific set of skills. Seriously, go on LinkedIn right now. Try to find yourself a cave diving anesthesiologist. I bet you can't. Now, Ron Howard is out with a brand new film about that rescue. It's called 13 Lives. I didn't know the picture existed until I stumbled across it on Amazon Prime Saturday morning, and I think they had just released it on Friday. I'm going to review it in the main segment, but in the open I want to talk a bit about the real event and why it's such an incredibly uplifting, edifying story, the kind of story that nobody with a functioning heart could walk away from without having some kind of faith in the innate goodness and decency and bravery of human beings in general. You can take yourself a group of people, any size, representing any cross-section of society. What's the quickest way to make them all agree on something? It is by saying there are some kids in danger and there is a chance to save them. Every single person in that group, they are now on the same team, and it never seems to make much difference whether the kids who are in danger are known to the people who are attempting their rescue. When a school building collapses due to a landslide or an earthquake or what have you, and it's full of kids, every person in the vicinity rushes straight to the scene and starts digging through the rubble trying to find survivors. If there are no digging implements close at hand, people will dig until there is no skin left on their fingers, and they won't give a single thought to whether any of the kids trapped inside are their kids or not. When kids are in danger, you damn well try to save them. It's just what you do. But with the kids in the cave in Thailand, it wasn't nearly as simple a matter as digging through rubble by brute force. You also had to solve 3 different major engineering problems just so you could get people to their location. And then you had to invent a series of new medical procedures that had never been contemplated by anybody before, much less attempted on weak, malnourished children. And you had to get the Thai government to go along with all the crazy shit that you were proposing. Now, you don't need me to remind you that for those 2.5, nearly 3 weeks, everybody on the planet agreed that getting those little boys out of that cave in Thailand was a critically important thing, and no effort or expense should be spared in making it happen. And there was no need to rationalize it. It's important because there are kids in danger and there is a chance to save them. I think the first question most people ask is, why the hell were they 6 miles from the cave mouth? And the answer to that is, it was a rite of passage and a team-building exercise that they were doing. Each time a new kid would join the team, they would all go into the cave and hike to the farthest extent that they could go, and the new kid would scratch his name into the mud, and they had just had 2 new members join the team in the previous week, and you'd be surprised how quickly barefoot young boys can cover long distances when they are having fun. 6 miles was probably like nothing to him. Hell, if there had been a 6-mile cave system right by my house when I was 11 or 12, I would have been in that thing every damn day. But since this is America, if we had big caves like that, they probably would be used primarily for teenagers to smoke weed and have sex, but that's just a guess. Normally, they close this cave system to the public between July and November because the whole thing floods every year, but this was on 23 June, so it was still open because the monsoon very rarely arrives before July, but this was the year it did. And so you've got 12 young boys between 11 and 16, no food, no clean water, no shoes, no clothing, but soccer jerseys and shorts, and their 25-year-old assistant coach suddenly finds himself managing a survival situation. Now, I have been an assistant soccer coach for a good number of years, actually, so I find myself really identifying with that guy on a lot of levels. When parents hand off their kids to you, even just for an afternoon practice, that's a solemn responsibility. They are delegating their authority to you, and it's your job to see that no harm befalls their son or daughter while they are in your charge. And yeah, somewhere in the back deepest recesses of your mind, you have to be prepared on some level to manage a survival situation. If somehow, some way, everything suddenly goes horrifically sideways in the most unpredictable way imaginable. And that happened to this guy, in a big way. For 10 days in pitch darkness, when most of the world presumed them all dead, he's got to keep these boys alive and sane and believing in the idea that somehow somebody is going to emerge out of that water to effect our rescue. And it took 10 days before Rick Stanton and John Volanthen, the two middle-aged English hobbyists, on their third attempt, after a 6-hour dive, managed to reach the chamber where the boys were located. But after 10 days, the absolute last thing these guys expected to find was the kids all alive and well. So as they're diving on their way back for 5 hours, they're both thinking, what in the hell are we supposed to do now? We have no way to extricate them from the location where they are. And we are the only two divers here who can even reach them. We are the only people who are ever going to see him alive. Them alive, pardon me. Which is a shitty thing to have to think about for 5 hours. Especially when you're underwater in a flooded cave and you probably should be preoccupying yourself with trying not to die. Now, there's a weird sort of admiration/apprehension that I feel toward people who find maximum peace and tranquility in activities where they might get killed at any moment if one single tiny thing goes a little bit wrong. But I guess when the situation calls for a guy who's willing to jump into a muddy hole and dive 6 miles into a cave in zero visibility, you don't get to be picky about personality types, do you? From atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, where we no longer allow recreational scuba divers into the moat as the alligators keep eating them. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And there are two sides, I suppose, to being a formerly colonized people. Thailand was part of the British Empire, but only fairly briefly, from 1885 to 1948. They got their independence shortly after the partition of India. And on the one hand, it's understandable that the Thais, or any country in their position, would find it distasteful having to appeal for help to the former colonial master. On the other hand, though, the people with the skills and experience to solve your very highly specialized problem, they might be extremely few and far between, and they might be from the country that was formerly your colonial occupier. And that is pretty much how the first week of this thing played out. The Thai Navy SEALs were very insistent that they had operational control, and it would be their men who were going to do any and all of the heavy lifting. The Thai Navy SEALs, they are young, fit, motivated, well-trained, highly capable professional war fighters, but their skills and training and experience and equipment are not relevant to this particular mission. Their dive training is in open, clear water. Their oxygen rigs are back mount and chest mount instead of the side mount ones that serious cave divers almost always use. None of their gear is anything that cave divers would use, and no matter how committed you are to the success of the mission, you can't overcome that just by effort and esprit de corps. But the guy who knows the cave system best, who has mapped it all by himself, is a British expatriate who happens to live in the local area. And the governor, who has actual operational control in spite of what the Navy SEAL commander says, he says to this British guy, Vern, he says, if you know any names of guys who might be able to come in and make better progress, who are better suited to this type of diving, here's a pencil and paper, please give me a list. And that's how Rick and John got dragged into the thing. Rick, who is played in the movie by Viggo Mortensen, and John, who is played by Colin Farrell. They seem like weird casting choices when you hear them, but I thought both of the performances were just great. I didn't know either guy was capable, frankly, of such deep character acting, but they obviously have spent a lot of time interacting with the men that they're portraying, and I'm always impressed with acting performances where it's an actor you know well, who you've seen for a long time, but he disappears into the character to such an extent that you find yourself forgetting who it is. And Mortensen with no hair on his head is kind of a trip. I didn't even realize it was him at first, frankly, and I only said, "For Frodo!" 2 or 3 times out loud, I think, which is an admirable feat of restraint on my part, all things considered. So Rick and John, they find the kids on day 10. 2 more days go by and the Thai government doesn't seem to know what to do, but eventually they decide to send their 7 fittest, bravest Navy SEALs to dive in with their open water scuba gear and reach the boys' location by any means necessary. They're given a briefing beforehand by Rick and John, but they were still in no way qualified to attempt the thing they were attempting, which is not just to dive the 6.2 miles with no cave diving experience using the wrong gear, but also to drag a few big-ass duffel bags full of food and blankets and medical supplies. It was rather improbable that all 7 men should make it there alive, but they did, to their credit, and it only took them 10 hours and 80% of their oxygen to do it. One of the guys was a doctor, and the plan had been for him to remain there with the boys no matter what, but the oxygen situation was now such that only 3 of the SEALs were able to make the return dive. So now, instead of 12 trapped kids and a coach, you've got 12 kids, a coach, 3 Navy SEALs, and a doctor who are all trapped. I was watching this interview with the doctor, Dr. Pack, who seems like a solid dude, where he said the first choice he made when he was joining the group with his 3 other colleagues was to tell the boys that the chain of command wasn't changing. Your coach is still in charge. We're here to help him and support him. He's kept you in good shape up to this point, so he is still the man running this operation. And what a very smart, very prudent thing to do. It was the exact best thing for the boys to hear because they were highly protective of their coach and devoted to him. When Rick and John first discovered the group and they were taking video footage of everybody, all the coach could say was, "I am so sorry to the parents for having put their boys in danger," and the boys, who have not had a bite of food for a week and a half, they all erupt in protest. "No, our coach is awesome. He is the man. He is why we are all alive and safe. He didn't do anything wrong." And it's easy to imagine if something like this happened in the United States, it would produce a raft of lawsuits that wouldn't be resolved for years or decades, and the coach would be one of the defendants. We know he would be. But what happened in this case? Well, when the parents saw the video of the coach being so effusively apologetic, they asked if they could write notes to him, along with the notes that they were writing to their sons. And what did the notes say? They said, "Thank you for keeping our sons safe. You are doing a wonderful job." I'm told the Thais have a saying that loosely translates as, "Generosity is the beginning of everything." And here you have a generosity of spirit being displayed on both sides. The coach shows a generosity of spirit by feeling as if he has affronted the parents by endangering their children, and the parents show a generosity of spirit by telling him that he hasn't done any such thing. One thing I really very much like about the Ron Howard picture is its treatment of faith and religion. In fact, I think I'm hard-pressed to think of a better treatment of Eastern religion that I have ever seen from a Western director. The local people have a legend about the boys, the mountain that the boys are trapped under. It's said that the mountain resembles a sleeping princess, so they have built up a legend around it and weaved it into the practice of the local Buddhist sect, in keeping with the long-standing human tradition of anthropomorphizing the local landscape and making folk religion out of it. And it's easy, as a Western director from a Western religious tradition, to portray these local animist spiritual beliefs as something to smirk or to roll one's eyes at. But Ron Howard, I think, does a brilliant job avoiding any of that. He makes the point without actually saying it, but it's a very crucially important point, that it doesn't matter if anybody's gods are actually real or their religious folklore is actually true. The thing that matters, ultimately, is the act of having faith in something. When that faith can be used as an extra reserve of physical strength or moral courage or extra resolve that enables people to endure the unendurable and to get through things they don't think they could get through otherwise. If your relationship with the divine, whatever version of the divine in which you happen to believe, if that's the thing that gets you across the finish line in the most important race of your life, then as a practical matter, it doesn't make any difference whether any certain bit of mythology is literally true or not. Now, the Thai Navy SEALs, they used their faith as a source of strength just as the parents did, just as the boys, just as the coach did. I'm about to attempt a 6-hour cave dive, and I have never cave dived before. If you've got some extra source of tranquility you can tap into at a moment like that, When you're about to do something potentially deadly and you need a little bit of extra steel in your backbone and the thing you get it from is prostrating yourself before the statue of the sleeping princess and beseeching her for permission to remain alive through the end of the day, then it's difficult to argue that religious faith is a superfluous pursuit. But the Thai Navy SEALs, despite boundless reserves of bravery and devotion to duty, they did wind up losing a guy named Saman Kunan, age 38. He wasn't active duty. He came out of retirement because he thought he might be useful. And he had this plan where he was going to take in wetsuits for all of the boys to wear, and they would be given a few days of dive training, and they would extricate them that way by having them swim themselves out. He tries to take all 13 wetsuits in one bag, which must have been a hell of a burden on a 6-hour cave dive. And nobody's certain exactly what happened to him. He either had an issue with his oxygen supply and couldn't get it flowing again, or he got disoriented and used up his tank and just lost consciousness. But after that, the Thai Navy says, okay, no more of our people are going past Chamber 3 anymore, which is basically less than halfway to where the boys are located. But they tell the foreign divers that they can proceed at their own discretion, so now John and Rick and a couple more buddies that they've flown in from the UK, they are the only guys who can effect the rescue. But they still don't have the faintest idea how to do it, until one of them says to the other, "Say, do we know any cave diving anesthesiologists?" So then, enter Dr. Richard Harris of Queensland, Australia, Harry to his mates. He's acquainted with Rick and John through cave diving circles. He's been at home keeping up with the story on TV, but he doesn't have any reason to think that he'll be participating in it directly, until he gets a text message from Rick that says, just hypothetically, just knocking ideas around here, would it be possible to sedate a small child and drag him underwater for 6 miles? Now, in the movie, they sort of changed this part around for dramatic effect, which I can forgive, I think. Harry agrees to come to Thailand to help out with the diving, but they haven't told him anything about wanting to sedate the kids. But in actuality, he agreed to come, but after emphatically screaming no in all caps to Rick's idea of knocking out the youngsters and transporting them like baggage. But eventually he arrives, he makes the dive, he meets the boys, he gets a sense of the situation, and he kind of has to come around to the unavoidable conclusion that sedation is the only way these boys are getting out of this cave alive. And since I am unfortunate enough to be the world's only cave diving anesthesiologist, I guess the duty falls to me whether I like it or not. And this man had every right in the world to throw up his hands and say, nope, this shit is way above my pay grade, these are not my kids, at least half of them are probably going to die even in the best case scenario, and I don't want any part of it. But he didn't say that. There were kids in danger in a far-off country, kids he never met before, kids he didn't owe anything to, but there was a chance to save them, and he was the only guy who could do it, so he damn well did it. First oral Xanax, then atropine in one leg to keep saliva down, ketamine in the other leg to induce unconsciousness. And each kid needed 3 to 5 top-up doses on the way out, but they all lived. They all came out in great shape. And that's pretty cool when you have told the governor in advance, sir, I guarantee you there will be casualties on this operation. And then you get to go back to him afterward with a clean sheet. 13 for 13, bitches. Look at that scoreboard. The films of Ron Howard's that I always enjoy the best are his treatments of real-life historical subjects and especially reluctant heroes, which makes this story right up his alley, so I'm glad he was the man to make this picture. It's just weird that it's an Amazon Studios thing that got dumped straight onto the streaming service after some token 4-day theatrical release. I would have seen this in the theater if I had known it existed. This is the kind of picture we need more of in the theaters. Real-life stories that edify the mind and uplift the spirit, because the best stories of all are the ones that come from real life. If you tried to write a fiction script with all the same stuff in it that this real-life story has, you would get laughed out of the pitch meeting. They would say it's too implausible, but there it is. It's 100% real, and it's a thing that every single person on the globe has cause to celebrate. There were kids in danger. There was a chance to save them, and they got saved. Roll fucking credits. 13 Lives gets 2 thumbs way the hell up on the Kerma-Joe-meter. Watch it or else you are a total loser. Have a pleasant tomorrow. See you Wednesday. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.